This video is over completing the square, and it's from Objective 4.3 video part 2. So completing the square is when the standard form of a quadratic does not have a b value that equals 0. You may instead be able to use a method called completing the square. It works really well when you have a leading coefficient of 1 and an even b value. If you don't have those two things, it is a little bit tougher. So we're only going to do examples with those two criteria. So first of all, let's talk about the definition of a perfect square trinomial. Certain trinomials fit a pattern when they are factored. So let's think back to factoring, and let's factor this trinomial. So first thing I want you to realize is that there are three terms, and there's no number in front of the x squared term, which means that we can go straight to here. We know that x and x are going to go here. And then we're looking for two numbers that multiply together to give us 16 and add together to give us -8. So I'm thinking about my factors of 16. I have 1 and 16, or -1 and -16. Neither one of those add to -8. 2 and 8, or -2 and -8. That gives me 10 and -10, so that's not it either. I also have 4 and 4 and -4 and -4. We found our winner. -4 and -4 add to -8. So it's going to go here. Well, when I do that, I notice that both of my factors are x minus 4. So I can write it like this, because that just means x minus 4 times itself. This is the definition of a perfect square trinomial when it factors as something squared like that. So let's look at this other one. We're looking for something similar here. So I do my two sets of parentheses. I have my x and x. Looking for two numbers that multiply together to give me +9 and add together to give me 6. So I have 1 and 9, -1 and -9. That's 10 and -10. 3 and 3 and -3 and -3. That's 6, which is what we want. So +3 plus 3. And then we can write it like this. So look at both of these examples. Notice that the last term, the c term, when we're referring to the standard form of a quadratic, the c term is a perfect square on both of those. And then when we square root that perfect square, whatever number we get, we double that. That's going to give us that middle b term there. Okay, so here's a phrase that you're going to want to remember to help you complete the square. If you can remember this, it really does help. Okay, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can actually read my writing here. Half it, square it, add it. That's the phrase we want to remember to complete the square. So, completing the square means rewriting it so that it can be factored as something squared like we did in the perfect square trinomials above. So if you look at example A here on number 1, we're looking at x squared plus 12x plus, so we're going to half this, so half of that is 6. 6 squared is 36. So that's going to make this a perfect square trinomial. So it's going to factor as something like this. So what two numbers multiply together to give us 36 and add together to give us 12? Well, it would be 6 and 6. So I want you to notice a couple of things about this. Notice that this sign is going to be part of the factoring, and notice that half of this middle number is going to go here. So let's take a look at B, and we'll do the same thing. Alright, so we're going to half this. 9 squared is 81. And then we're going to factor it. So we're going to bring down our variable, bring down this sign. And then we are going to half that middle number. That's going to go here. So x plus 9 times x plus 9. 9 times 9 gives us 81. 9 plus 9 gives us 18. So it works great for us. Take a look at C. So we're going to half 2, which is 1. 1 squared is 1. We're going to factor. So what two numbers multiply together to give us 1 and add together to give us 2. Well, we're going to keep that sign, and we're going to take half of this number. And that should always work as long as you did the first step correctly. Okay, last one here. Half of this is 13. 13 squared is 169. And then we're going to factor it. Let's bring down our x, bring down this sign, so plus, and then half of that middle number, 13. Good job, guys. All right, so here's an example worked out for you. Let's flip it over and let's do some examples on the back. Okay, so we're going to solve each equation by completing the square. So follow along, take notes, pause, write down steps, ask questions, whatever you need to do to understand the process. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to move this c term out of the way. So we are going to, in this case, add 5. We're going to get c term out of the way. And when I rewrite this, I'm going to leave a little bit of room here. And I know I'm going to be adding something, so I'm going to put a plus sign. I'm going to go ahead and 0 plus 5 is 5, plus, I'm going to leave a blank here. Now the reason I put plus blank on both sides, we're going to do our half it, square it, add it at this point. Now when I add something to one side, I have to add it to the other. So just keep that in mind. So our goal is to turn this left side into a perfect square trinomial. So we're going to have 2, which is 1. 1 squared is 1. And then I have to add that to both sides. The reason I did that is because now I can factor this left side as something squared. So remember, we bring down this middle sign, so plus, and then half that middle number is 1. So it factors as x plus 1 squared, because 1 times 1 is 1, and 1 plus 1 is 2. Then we're going to go ahead and add this stuff on the right side, gives us 6. Now why would we do that? Because now it looks just like the problems we did in the video from part 1. If I'm trying to solve for x, and I want to get x by itself, I'm going to undo that squared by square rooting. I'm left with x plus 1 equals plus or minus root 6. I can't simplify square root of 6, so now I just have to undo that plus 1. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. Since square root of 6 cannot subtract 1, I'm just going to write those separate, just like I showed you in the part 1 video. Alright, let's try that again. Slow it down a little bit this time. Okay, so our first step is to move that c term out of the way. Okay, so remember I'm going to be adding something to both sides. I'm going to go and put my blank. Okay, so I'm going to half it. Half 16 is 8. Squared is 64. So I'm going to add 64 to both sides. Alright, so now I'm going to factor this left side. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give us 64 and add to give us negative 16. So it's negative 8 and negative 8. So I'm going to go ahead and write that as x minus 8 squared. Remember, we can just bring down that first sign and half that middle number. That's a shortcut. Go ahead and add this stuff on the right side. And then I'm trying to solve for x. I'm going to undo this squared. So I square root both sides. I have x minus 8 equals plus or minus 6. Now 8x is still not by itself, so to undo this 8 by adding 8 to both sides. And it's negative, so I'm going to add it. Positive 6 plus 8 is 14, and negative 6 plus 8 is 2. So my two solutions are 14 and 2. Alright, let's go ahead and try C. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to move that C term out of the way. I'm going to add 56 to both sides. It's okay that there's not a 0 on that right side. I'm going to do plus on both sides. Okay, so then we're going to half it. So half of 2 is 1. squared is still 1. I'm going to add that to both sides. I'm going to factor this left side. Looking for two numbers that multiply together to give us 1 and add together to give us -2. So it's -1 and -1. So I can write it as x minus 1 squared. I'm trying to solve for x, so I'm going to undo the squared by square rooting. So x minus 1 equals plus or minus square root of 62. I cannot simplify the square root of 62, so I'm just going to try to get x by itself by adding 1 to both sides. Cannot actually add those together, so I'm going to leave it separate as 1 plus or minus square root of 62. You'll get used to that notation. I know it's a little different right now, but just keep practicing it and you'll get used to how you're supposed to write that. Alright, last one. So let's move our c term out of the way. Plus blank equals 25 plus blank. Half it, square it, add it. So half of 8 is 4, squared is 16. I'm going to add that to both sides. I'm going to factor that left side. Remember, variable, bring down this symbol, half of that middle number. Add your stuff on the right side. I'm trying to solve for x. I'm going to undo that squared by square rooting. X minus 4 equals plus or minus root 41. Square root of 41 cannot be simplified since there's no perfect square that goes into it, so I'm going to leave it alone. And then we're going to add 4 to both sides. Since we can't actually add them together, we're going to leave it separate, just like we did on the last one. Good job, guys. Let me know if you need any questions.